I would like to introduce our speaker, Tom Garner. Tom has spoken before. He talked about the Welland Canal and how it was formed. He has a bio here, but it is the shortest bio of all the speakers we've ever had. So he graduated from York University with a master's in business administration. He retired in March of 23 after working as an advisor in the field of energy and finance. In retirement, Tom is an appreciator of the Welland Canal, a recreational cyclist, and a slot car racer. And so his presentation today is called Beaverdams and the Lost Creek, and that connects to the Welland Canal. So, Tom, it's all yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to do my best to share this screen. That should be it. And everybody see that?
Not
Now we can.
yet.
Is it up? Is it up there, Graham?
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Okay, so beaver dams. Now, if you wander around my neck of the woods, the name of Beaver Dams is actually inescapable. There's a Beaver Dams Road on the east side of the canal, a Beaver Dams Road on the west side of the canal. There's a village of Beaver Dams where this little blue sign is. There's a Battle of Beaver Dams Park in Thorold. You might remember the name of Beaver Dams from, can't remember. There's a famous battle in the War of 1812 to 14, and it was the Battle of Beaver Dams, and it's everywhere. But I know Jane's question: are there beaver dams? And the answer kind of is not right now. So I've tramped around the territory that we'll be talking about here as much as I can. A lot of it is wetlands now, and then a lot of it is flooded, as you'll see. And I haven't seen any beaver dams. I'm not saying they're not there, and I expect that they were at a point in time. But we're going to be talking about the Lost Creek. There was and there remains still there of the historical Beaver Dams Creek. And so we're going to talk about that and why it is the Lost Creek. All right, so I did not have this problem before. So what I'm trying to do now is advance the slides. There we are. So the waters of eastern Niagara Peninsula, so basically north to south between the lakes and towards the Niagara River. So that's my neck of the woods. Been very strongly affected by the hand of non-Indigenous man for quite some time, for as long as kind of our people have been there. So that we're going to talk about Beaver Dams Creek, how it was, how it is now, and how it all happened. There's a little bit of a mystery there, which you'll see. And so it is the Lost Creek. And I want to give a shout out here to a manager at Ontario Power Generation. So OPG is a big actor in what has happened with Beaver Dams Creek over the couple of centuries now, actually. And so he was, when I met him, the manager of the DeQ Falls Generating Station, among other things. He's since been promoted, but he's been very generous with his time, and he doesn't actually have a lot. And the reason he doesn't have a lot is you might have read about a big refurb of some of the turbines at the Beck Generating Complex, and he is heavily involved in that, might be running it. So, where are we starting? The best I can piece together, the blue lines are basically the course of the historical Beaver Dams Creek. So like the Welland Canal that we talked about the last time that I spoke with you is a north-south story. This is an east-west story, and it's not the only east-west system on the Upper Niagara Peninsula, but there are a number of them. and actually none of them drain into the Niagara River. And the reason for that, I'm kind of channeling a presentation I saw on the Welland River, is that the glaciers were obviously very, very heavy, kilometers of ice. And when they receded, there's a kind of a springback effect. And so there is in parts of the upper Niagara Peninsula near the Niagara River, uh, a subtle watershed. And so the waters of the Beaverdams Creek that you see here actually rise west of that watershed, and they flow west. You've got northern tributaries, middle tributaries, and southern tributaries, and the whole thing meets up um, near where the modern Highway 406 is. And Beaver Dams Creek used to be the waters for the DeQ Falls, very, very picturesque. Um, and they go down the falls, they follow a channel, and then they meet up with the waters of the 12-mile creek system, which is a whole other story that I actually haven't fully documented yet, but watch this space. Now, I want to draw your attention to Beechwood Golf Club. So we're going to come back to that. Now, a few things on the Beaver Dams Creek are more or less where they were historically. On the left is DeQ Falls. Now, DeQ Falls used to tip over the escarpment, uh, several hundred meters to the west of the falls as you see it now. But just as Niagara Falls could have chewed its way back from the natural course of the escarpment to where it is now over the post-glacial era, DeQ Falls, much smaller falls, did the same thing. But what's left is actually quite picturesque. So I was glad to get this picture. On the right is the Beechwood Golf Club, and it's pretty much as it was. The Q Falls is where it was historically, but it's fed by water from Lake Erie, and we'll get to why that is a little bit later. This little bit of water on the Beechwood Golf Club is a stretch where the creek is naturally at the level of the canal, and so this is pretty much historic. And these are the original waters. We're several kilometers west of the canal here, but I'm telling you, everything else has been flooded, reroaded, dammed, overrun by water from the Welland Canal. You name it. So when did this all start? Well, we talked to you about the Welland Canal last time. The first Welland Canal, which no trace still exists because the locks are made of wood, and so they did what wooden things do from that era. But at that time, uh, there was no combustion power to do any of the civil work. So everything is done by muscle, either human muscle or animals. So work was very, very slow. So you didn't want to do any more of it than you absolutely had to. And so the canal builders of that era, basically, they needed to get a canal from point A to point B. They just looked to the existing waterways and say, well, where could we hitch a ride? And so part of hitching a ride on the first canal and the second canal, and to an extent even to today, is the Beaver Dams Creek system. Two parts of it: the northernmost tributaries and the southern tributaries. And so this had the effect of flooding back because the natural level of the second Welland Canal, which is the best documented, was 172 meters above sea level, a little bit lower than it is now, but it was higher than the natural course of the Beaver Dams Creek at that time. So obviously you're going to have flood back water. So this has been going on for a long time. The inset is from some survey maps of the second Welland Canal. You saw some of these last time that we spoke. and the pink part is it labeled as pond of backwater. So that's flooding back. So you were already seeing even in the 1820s that the Beaver Dams Creek was being used for purposes beyond its natural purpose. The Welland Canal also met up with the southern tributaries, um, and this gave rise to something you might wonder. So if you've got water coming down the natural course of Beaver Dams Creek at the north and the south, and you have the natural flow of of Beaver Dams Creek and the natural flow of the canal, which is south to north, what happens? Because you can't compress water. And what actually happens, not really part of this story, but what happens is they had a flume, which basically, lets water out of the canal. Um, and that fact does come back a little bit later on. Next, there's a mill, which is still there. The Morning Star Mill wasn't named that at the time, goes back to 1872, and it just catches the water from the historical Beaver Dams Creek as it tips over into DeQ Falls, and those historical buildings are still there. They've been beautifully renovated, so that is now open again. So that didn't actually affect the waters very much. But a few years later, everything changes. 1875, City of St. Catharines, they wanted to take advantage of the water that was in the course of Beaver Dams Creek for water treatment plant. Now, water at elevation is enormously valuable all the time, but for the water authority, it was particularly useful because, again, we're largely before widespread use of combustion power, although the steam shovels were in action at that time. And just to get water out of Lake Ontario, it's about a 3 to 5 meter height of land, really, from lake level before you get up onto the plain of the lower Niagara Escarpment. So having water at elevation is just great. And so what they did was they threw a dam across Beaver Dams Creek. That dam is still where it was at the time. And there is still a water treatment plant there. The lower figure here, there are 3 ponds. These grounds are beautifully kept. I was walking along DeQ Road once, and some people from out of town were saying, "Is that a golf course?" I said, "No, that's the water treatment reservoirs." Uh, so that's all still there. Now, there was water coming through Beaver Dams Creek at the time, but now we're going to talk about this incompressible water. It wasn't enough. So the problem that had arisen, kind of in the European era, is there was farming on the upper Niagara escarpment, and when you farm, you take down all the trees, and so the spring runoff really runs off, and so you can be caught without water. That fact actually explains the existence of the Welland Canal, but that's a story that we've been through before. So the engineers, they basically they look back up towards the canal, and they notice that there is this figure, the Higgins flume, which lets water out. And so they determined that the water quality there was good enough that they could use it as water with treatment, that they could use that for municipal water. That was not a given. I mean, ships are not super clean. I mean, the big industrial ships that fly the canal, not the cleanest things, although they're much better. They're much better now. But at the time, it was reasonable to be concerned about about ships' effect on the potable water. But in the end, that actually worked. So it's really starting to impact the Beaver Dams Creek system. But it was just a creek bed. Like the blue line was pretty much where it was, and all the other water that was there is a story for slightly later. If you're standing here or here. You can see there's actually a cut that goes through this little peninsula there. Some people thought that was the course of the second Welland Canal, but it isn't. The elevations are all wrong. What I think it was, and there's nobody left to ask, is I think that just helped the plumbing of the water supply system. And so if you're cutting through here, then the water from the upper tributaries can meet up with the southern tributaries and then flow into the system as it was. All right. So now we're going to be going back and forth between the effect of the canal and the effect of the power generation. The municipal water system doesn't really have much yet to do anymore with the waters. So in 1898, the original DeQ Falls generating station was put into service. It's still there. I'll show you a picture in a sec. And Nikola Tesla, the historical Nikola Tesla, was involved in this because there was an early example of long distance transmission, in this case to Hamilton to power a streetcar system. And this did not have a big effect. So the waters, here's the historical Beaverdams Creek, and then there was a initial power canal, and that power canal is still there, although it's been repurposed for municipal water. Get back to that in a sec. And the engineers had to deal with the fact that where they wanted the water, they wanted it at the elevation of this. It's about 170 meters, but they had to get across the valley of Beaverdams Creek. So they actually built a viaduct that went over all that, and it fit into this system here. So there's one reservoir, another reservoir, third reservoir here. Exactly how water got from here to here, I don't know, but it had to happen. When they first opened this plant up, it was just one turbine, but at that time, 1890s, power demand rose very quickly, and so they put in a bunch more turbines. They're still operating and producing commercial power. I saw one that has a 1903 nameplate on it, and yeah, still running. And then in 1904, that's when those later turbines went in. Now we're still back at the original DeQ Falls Power Station number 1, but there's quite a few turbines there now. And so the state of play changed completely. First thing is that power canal I was telling you about, they stopped using it for power because it just wasn't big enough. And then they started to use it to feed the municipal. And so there's an infeed from that canal system to the municipal water system right there. They gave up on trying to feed DeQ Falls with Beaverdams water. And so there's a canal along Cataract Road right here. You can see it from the road, and it flows over a little cataract, and then it tips out over DeQ Falls here. All this water. That's artificial lakes, Lake Gibson and Lake Moody. And so the water now is where it was at that time. And I can tell you that if you go to certain places like right there, the water is kind of lapping up onto the lawn. And so there isn't room for any more water here. And significance of that will come through shortly. So this basically, if you're walking these waters as I have and as many others have, this is pretty much what it looked like since 1904. So obviously you can see that Beaverdams Creek itself is now flooded by these, mainly with the power waters. And here it is. Ontario Power Generation refers to this as the cottage, but of course these are all people that are very familiar with the generating complex, which is much larger. The total capacity of this is 23 megawatts. Is that a lot or a little? Well, the Beck generating complex is 2,000. So it's a little, but they keep it running. It has something to do with a treaty between Canada and the United States, which is a long, long story. So I think I'll leave that for another time, or you can just look it up. And then this is one of these turbines I was telling you about. Now, when I took this picture, um, it was running and it was producing power for the grid. 1903. It's good stuff. Now, of course, the Voith company is still in. It's now Voith Siemens. They're very much still in business, but they're not making spares for these old turbines anymore. Ontario Power Generation has a few machine shops. Most of the spare parts that they need for these old machines they make at the larger machine shop back on the Niagara River at the Beck complex. But this still works. So these are an interesting story. These are penstocks. You can see these from quite a ways away. So the intake is up here, obviously, and then they flow into the power station down here. All these big pipes. Last decade, they wore out. It just nothing to see here. It was just they wore out because of a century of water coursing through, and a lot of enthusiasts for this power plant, which again you got to admit it's pretty picturesque. Were concerned that they're just going to shut it. They were going to shut it down, but they didn't. They replaced it, brand new pipes. They got new concrete structures to support them, and so it'll probably be good for another 100 years. So I'm glad they did that. Now, so um, that was in 1904, and the next big thing that happened was on the canal side. Now, the waters, from the second Welland Canal are kind of where they were when I showed you a few pages ago. The third Welland Canal didn't really affect the Beaverdams Creek waters that much. The original creek bed was still there. It was kind of in this area here. They had to communicate between the natural course of now in the middle tributaries, the natural course of the creek and Lake Gibson, which is this section in here. But the water still continued to flow. You get to the fourth Welland Canal, and the fourth Welland Canal is really deep. It is a little higher, 173.4, but it goes down 9 meters from the surface. And so what they did was waters at different elevations obviously can't mix, and so they built a siphon under the canal, and it wasn't very big. It was like a 6-inch siphon. And the reason for that is it didn't really have to carry very much water. But Beaver Dams Creek is, it's not a major waterway and it doesn't carry that much water. So, these are the middle tributaries right here, and it kind of meanders around through what is now an industrial site, and it goes under, and then there's a dug ditch that goes kind of all the way to this pond, and then from there it's conveyed to into Lake Gibson. But the water flows that direction. That might not sound like an exotic conclusion, but just stay with me. So you had this part of the canal which was flooded back. You had the southernmost part which was flooded back, although it's all wetland, so it's very difficult to investigate, and I have not. This part they pretty much left alone. There would have been a weir right about here. This road no longer goes through. And you roll the clock forward, and you expect to see what I just showed you, that you'd see, kind of a weir over which the waters of the Beaver Dams Creek would flow into Lake Gibson, but you don't. If you're, kind of into the Beaver Dams Park, this is in the village of Beaver Dams, and there's a park there, and you kind of scooch out onto the rocks to get a shot. You see this thing. What is that? Fairly elaborate structure. Here's the back. So when I was investigating this in 2020, I wondered, what exactly that thing was. I mean, it's way more elaborate than than you would expect, given what we saw from when the fourth canal was built in 1932. And then the other thing you find that was not on that map from 1932 is this. It's a rock and earth dam, and it's got Ontario Power Generation signage, which is odd because there's no generating assets within several kilometers of this. They're like way on the other side of the canal. And this is pretty high. These waters are high. That's canal level, 173.4 most of the year. In the winter, they drop in a meter. And these houses, um, well, if this dam ever breaks, which it won't, then this whole area would be flooded. These houses would only have been built after this thing was built, because otherwise it would have been a floodplain. But there's a whole neighborhood here. There's parks, schools, these houses. So what happened between 1932 and present day? So before we get to the answer to that question, this is the context. So here's the map we saw at the beginning. And this, you can see here where this dam goes across and it backs up right here to canal level. It communicates with the canal through this dug channel. And then this is part of the backwater. There's dock walls in here. And then there's an industrial area here, which is now part of the portlands. So this is where we're talking. And then going under the canal, that's right about here. So continuing on with what it looks like now. Now remember, we were on the Beechwood Golf Club. So if you're just barely to the west of that, you hit this. And these are the flood back waters. They come back that far. They're about 3 kilometers back from the canal. And the valley of Beaverdams Creek is very shallow. Just the historical valley. It's very shallow, and so it looks very impressive. It's a big area, but in the winter times, I said they drop the level of the canal just a meter. I don't know why. Still on the case, and so you can see that a lot of it is it's more or less dry land. So this is a big change. It's a big change from 1932. And this is what happened. So in 1943, as part of the war effort for the Second World War, the Q Falls Generating Station number 2 went into service. Now this is much, much larger. There's only 2 generators in this thing, compared to I think it's about 4 of them that are in service at number 1 right now, and a couple of that are out of service. But it's vastly larger. So the amount of water that is required to run the turbines at full chat is 7 times what it would have been before 1943. So how is it going to get this? How is it going to get this water? Well, you think, you need a larger reservoir. I mean, there's a lot of water available from Lake Erie. That's not the problem. Problem is, how do you get it to this generating station? 7 times as much water. So you can't increase the surface area of the reservoir, because there's no room. As I said, it's already lapping up on the shores in a number of different places, so you can't go any higher. You're going to flood out existing interests. So the only thing that can happen is that they had to increase the velocity of the water. So when I was talking to the engineer at OPG, I speculated. I said, so if velocity of the water goes up 7 times, if stuff starts to get real, it will get real in a hurry. And he did not disagree with me. So what do they do? So the first thing they did is they had to protect the the reservoir system. So Lake Gibson and Lake Moody, they had to protect those reservoirs from unforeseen or unplanned inflows from the historical waters. Now, this is only ever going to happen about once a year during the spring runoff, but it could happen. So what they did was they built this dam, which we've talked about, and this protects those reservoirs so they don't have to worry about water from the Beaverdams Creek system um, overtaxing the capabilities of the reservoirs. And this thing is a pumping station. So OPG, and I will say that utilities are extremely conservative, and that's very much a feature, not a bug. So they weren't going to have to worry about um, having to uh, you know they were going to they wanted to make sure that water from the historical Beaver Dams Creek didn't back up. Now, how is it going to back up? Well, the Rock and Earth Dam that I showed you, those dams always leak a little bit, just a little, but there is no freeboard on the lands below the dam. So if they just let it go, then there will be times when there is at least the potential for that neighborhood to flood. So this course of this creek communicates through this siphon. And so this pumping station here, what it will do, and it runs a couple of times a day. What it does is it actually pumps water, not a lot, but it pumps water into Lake Gibson from this creek. So now you've got the dam protecting Lake Gibson, Lake Moody. You've got this thing protecting the neighborhood from Beaver Dams Creek and the seepage from the dam. And that kind of explains how they got there. Um, I I noodled on this for I'm going to say like 3, 4 years, and I could never figure out what these things were. So I just had to find the one guy that would give me the answer. More stuff. So I won't go into everything that Ontario Power Generation has at its disposal to deal with potential high water situations. They have many levers to pull. Um, this is one of them. This rusty, ugly figure. If the level of the reservoir system, and here specifically Lake Gibson, gets too high, then they can turn pumps on and they can pump water into the municipal water reservoirs. They prefer not to because the quality of the water in uh, the reservoirs is probably pretty good. It comes from directly from Lake Erie, but it's not checked all the time. But if you run into a situation, then you can relieve the pressure on the reservoir by putting water here. And you remember, they can also, from there, they can also send more water over to Q Falls, and so that becomes like another way that they can do it. I talked for about half. The last time I talked to the engineer at OPG, we talked for about half an hour, and they have many ways of basically dealing with a high water situation. They run simulations all the time. They continue to make improvements to things so that there's always power if they need to do something. Because you could also be in a high water and a power out situation. So they thought about that. So rest assured that if you live in this area, you will not be flooded out. So my thesis is Beaver Dams really is the Lost Creek. If you take a look at the maps that we looked at the beginning, there was a pretty sleepy, low flow creek that dug itself a not very deep, a very shallow valley. over the many years post glacial. Um, and I guess the first thing, if you really want to go back, is the beginning of agriculture. So as opposed to a creek that would pretty much run most of the year, the spring runoff became much more pronounced. And then you had all the stuff that we've talked about. The flood back in the 1820s. The middle tributaries were kind of leaned on over and over again. And that channel I showed you on the golf course, that's 3 kilometers back from from the canal, east of the canal. And so um, anything before that is unnatural. The southern tributaries passed under the canal. A place, it's actually, I think they called it the Davis Culvert at the time. Um, I've walked around there quite a bit, and I think I know where the waters come out on the west side of the canal, but it's all wetlands, so you can't walk there. And on the east side, I can keep trying, but I haven't found the intake yet. The maps, like just look on Google Maps, you can see that there are waterways that are indicated there, but I haven't seen that yet. And yeah, everything west of the canal has been comprehensively flooded for a very, very long time. We're not talking, kind of 120 years. So it was fun. My actual kind of installment, because I've got my website, as you know, on this is much longer because what I try to do is that's the story of trying to derive where the creek was. That's a much longer presentation than this format calls for. Um, but that was fun, and I hope this was fun for you. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, thank you very much, Tom. I have one question, and we'll open it up to everybody else in a minute, but two questions actually. Do you know how the acreage of wetland compares today to what there was before the canal went in? All of this. I know that there's been a lot of change, but
Yeah.
one of the things we have been very good at as humans is ridding ourselves of wetlands when indeed we need those wetlands for the natural environment to work as it should. Do you have any idea?
Uh, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that wetland acreage may have been added. I'm not, before we get into any subtraction, wetland acreage may have been added because there are a couple of places, as you've seen, where the creek has been backed up. And so if when it floods an area that was previously just, kind of at a natural level with a channel going through, that creates wetlands, and they're all over the place. Like there's, as I said, you get down towards Allenburg and Davis, where the Davis Creek may have been. There's wetlands there. If you go back to the flood back areas east of the canal to the golf course, and then the northern tributaries are flooded back as well. You can't really, at least I can't, really investigate those because it's all wetland. You go in up to your hips. So I think that may have been an accretion to the wetlands, but what has been lost, I don't know, because I know pretty much, and we all know pretty much where the natural course of the Beaverdams Creek was, but we don't know what it looks like. I mean, was it wetlands, or was it like just a natural
Yeah.
flat land with a stream going through? It's interesting. If I knew, I would tell you, but unfortunately, that's what
How
that's what I
deep are
don't
the
know.
lakes? The lakes Moody and Gibson, how deep are they?
Oh, not very, not very.
So
Uh,
effectively, they could be classified as wetlands,
no, because there's always water in. Like they have a clean
always
shoreline. There
moving.
is there is one place if you're walking north along a path, which it's an OPG path, but you're allowed to walk it. This be careful of the bees. There was one place there where water goes under the path, and if you look on a map, it looks like there's a water course there. If you're actually there, it's all wetlands, and it's like a moderate sized area. Other than that, Lakes Gibson and Moody have a clean shoreline all the way around. Same thing with the
Okay.
water reservoirs. It's got a clean shoreline, and since uh, kind of 1904, and particularly since 1943, the waters are really moving. Um,
Okay.
so that doesn't really, it's
Qualify as
not
wetlands.
conducive to
No.
wetland. It's a water.
Mm.
It's a super highway by Beaverdams Creek
And my
standards.
second question was the pronunciation of Ducey, Dewce. Is that correct? Am I saying that correctly?
Uh,
How do, Deuce, Decew. How do you say that?
oh, DeQ,
DQ.
DeQ. Yeah.
Q.
So there was a guy named DeQ, and the
Oh, there
remains of
was.
of his last building, kind of as it was in the Lower Seacord era. Lower Seacord was part of the Battle of Beaver Dams Creek. That was the battle. Um, and so that's DeQ Road. And so he was. I haven't studied that in detail, but I think he was bought out by the industrial interest. So you got the water authority and you've got the power authority. So he was bought out, all the agricultural land that he had basically on what is now DeQ Road. And there was he left and he went to, I think, what is now Haldeman County. And there was a DeQsville in Haldeman County. I think it's the same guy.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, so the remains of his house, when they had the 18 Lower Seacord walk in 2013, um,
Mhm.
you start at the Lower Seacord house, and then you can walk. There's a 30-kilometer walk. A lot of it's just through urban St. Catharines, so it's not that interesting. But a lot of it is interesting, and you end up climbing the escarpment. You go across the Lower Seacord Bridge, which was not there when she went across in skirts.
Hmm.
And then you the climb the escarpment. There's a path that goes up there. That's how I got the shot of DeQ Falls. The easy way to get that shot is to go in the front from DeQ Road, but it was closed because they were renovating and rehabilitating the mill, and so they just there's construction going on, put a fence up, and so I had to go around the other way. That's how
Sounds
that's
like
how
it.
that's
Sounds like it
Okay.
would be worth going to see, though. The
I
mill.
think Jim
Falls.
has a question.
yes.
Yes, Jim has a question. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, my compliments on a marvelous bit of local history, and I also addicted to curiosity. How did you happen to get interested in this area? Do you live around there? I missed your intro,
Yeah.
and I just wonder how your curiosity got provoked.
Um, I do live in the area. I live in Niagara-on-the-Lake,
Ah,
and at the, I'm kind of a once and future cyclist. I used to, go north south along the canal, among other routes, of course. And if you start from where I'm talking right now, and you go west, you hit the canal at Lock One, and so that's at 14 meters elevation from the lake. And there's a lock there, and you can kind of guess the rest. There's only 7 lift locks. Like they basically go up 99 meters in 7 lifts.
Wow.
Pretty impressive. And so then you turn south and you just go along the canal, and it's pretty much entirely an off-road trail, and I just love it. That was kind of before the pandemic, um, and even during the first year of the pandemic, that was my go-to route. 100 kilometers if you do the whole thing from my place to Port Colborne and back. And so you go back and forth and back and forth, and you get to Allenburg. And Allenburg is now part of the city of Thorold. At one time, it was a standalone village, and it's only there because of the canal. Um, and you take a look and there's just water in two places in Albert. Water is just gushing out of the canal. Uh, Unbelievable amounts of water. So you ask yourself, well, what's that all about? So one time, as not on the bike, I drove to Allenburg and parked, and I walked the waters where they went. And where do they go? Well, you've seen the map. They go to DeQ Road, and then a bunch of stuff happens. Um, and so it's that's how I got interested in it. So I did my first installment. I have a website, wellandcanalsandwaters.ca. I think Diane's got that. Um, and so my first one was called the Allenburg Waters because, well, that's how I kind of stumbled onto this thing. And then the next one I did was Beaverdams, and that installment in my website is almost 50 pages long. So, and it's a very painstaking development of kind of where the Beaver Dams Creek was, and for this format, that's not that's not really usable. But that's how I got interested in it. I've got one called the Dry Canal. They drain much of the canal in the wintertime, so you get to look at things you don't normally get to look at, including that one shot from the golf course where you see a lot of dry land. I got one for that. I've got one called sources and uses. So basically, where does the water come from? That's pretty easy. It all comes from Lake Erie. How much and where does it all go? And I balance that thing within 0.5%. So I can tell you that all that water that leaves the canal at Allenburg, that's well over 90% of the total that comes in. And so if you see a canal where there's a big change in elevation, the water is for power and the channel is for navigation. They don't, the canal operations use very, very little water. It's a very, very efficient system. I got one called the Second Welland Canal, which is, I used part of that for my presentation last time. So, and I'm still on the hunt, so the discussions I've had with my friend at OPG, that's going to, there's two presentations I want to do. I need to do more field interviews. There's going to be one called Power, which is where all is the power generation on the canal. There's more to it than DeQ Falls. And the other one is going to be called Control, which is like, where are all the control points? Who controls it? What's the logic? How do they make sure stuff doesn't go wrong, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't work on this every day, but it was during 2024 that I finally solved what was a mystery to me, not a mystery to people at OPG, about that the pumping station and the dams, to why they are where they are. So yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any other comments or questions? Okay, I have another question. From what you've just said, you've got at least 3 more presentations coming up.
Yep.
I'm looking at the 12 Mile Creek story.
Yes.
And then your one on power and the one on control.
There's actually going to be 2 on 12 Mile Creek. There's just too much. The 2 stories there, you've got the upper 12 Mile Creek. 12 Mile Creek, Graham, is there a way I can stop sharing?
Yeah, I just hit the stop share. Yeah.
Okay, where is that?
At the bottom, maybe?
Yeah, let me try that. Trolling along. There we are. So upper 12 Mile Creek is basically everything upstream of basically the intersection of the 12 Mile Creek system and the Beaverdams Creek system. I've got pictures of that exact spot. It doesn't really translate. It looks great when, very, very charismatic when you're there, and then you take a look at the picture and you say, really, is that all there is? But there are very few, the top of the escarpment, which is ancient, like it predates the glaciers by millennia, is dolomite. It's really, really hard. And then everything below that is softer. Now, if you want a really long conversation, I can tell you some of the implications of that. As Jane can tell you, this is one of those don't get me started moments. But very few of the historical waterways, the north-south waterways. And there, a lot of them are just numbered creeks. Not all the numbered creeks are large enough to have tipped over the escarpment, but a number of them are. Very few of them actually broke through. 10 Mile Creek did, which has been overwritten by the current canal. It broke through and made the construction of the third Welland Canal a lot easier than it would have been. But, and then you have to go, to 12 Mile Creek, hold that thought. And then you really have to go to like the Red Hill Creek, the Red Hill Valley Parkway, a huge valley that broke through. 12 Mile Creek broke through, and there's just an amazing network of tributaries that go back from the escarpment. So if you're riding your bike, you go up the escarpment up onto Pelham Road, then you go south. You're trying to get to Fenwick. There's a cafe there, and so you're riding along southbound, and you start to go downhill, and you go a long way downhill. And you say, "Well, didn't we just do the escarpment?" This isn't the escarpment. It's one of the multiple valleys of the 12 Mile Creek system. And you go a long way down. And to dig yourself back out again, like you're darn near at lake level, dig yourself back out again. There's a story. And again, some of it's a little bit difficult to capture on pictures, but I'm retired. I got time. Now, the lower 12 Mile Creek, that's a little bit different. That's a different story. I mean, it's not breaking through anything. There's a valley. And it's actually fairly impressive. It's got a 23-meter deep valley. Now, why is that useful? Well, because if you're trying to generate power, like kind of meter per second of flow, cubic meter per second of flow is worth way more if it drops 80 meters than if it drops 56. Well, Niagara Falls, 56 meters. All the power plants that were built there are all closed. And the water rights all went to the Beck complex on our side and the Moses complex on the other side. By the way, we beat the Americans to power, at that point by decades. Just saying. At Tequila Falls, they put the power plant there because they got 56 meters of the escarpment, but they also got the 23-meter drop into the valley of 12 Mile Creek. So that's why that thing is there. It's actually very efficient. It's not very big, but it's very efficient. So there's going to be a whole story that just kind of reminds people of that because the story's already been told in other things. And then you can just follow it along. But there's way more to that than that because 12 Mile Creek was canalized. It used like the first and second canals, and the third canal used to actually exit into Lake Ontario, not where it does now, but at Port Dalhousie in St. Catherine. And so there's a whole lot of dredging and rerouting and all the rest of it. So there's a story to tell.
Wow, it blows my mind just to think about it, and of course it brings us to what's happening on the waterfront in Toronto and how much effort there is being put into that in order to build the islands at the bottom of the Don River, etc.
Yeah.
Which actually leads me to a question. Do you have any idea? I mean, all of that is historical. Do you have any idea whether Ontario Power Generation has any plans to do things differently in the future?
So, yes, I'll try to give you the short version. At Tequila Falls, there's still at least one weir. Now, this is not a big drop, but there is already a drop of water at two weirs there are two intakes. Kind of at the upstream end of the intake from into Tequila Falls from the intersection with Welland Canal. And so what we were told, there's a group of us went to visit. That's also a story. What they said is, we're just going to put a turbine there. There are types of turbines where you can have low head. So if you got an 83-meter drop, that's a long way down. So you're going to have one type of turbine. But if you have a low head situation, you can have another. But the volume is there, and there's a lot of water flows through there. So that's the plan. It's not going to generate a lot of power, but every little bit helps. You might wonder, well, what about the the water that flows, kind of down the flight locks and the various locks and stuff. Could they put something there? No, it's already been done. The Canal Authority itself has a generating station at the base of Lock 4, which they use for their own operations. I thought it was connected to the grid. That would make sense. My friend at OPG says he doesn't think that's true. Anyways, I gotta verify that. And then there are little tiny 2 kilowatt generators at locks 1, 2, and 3. So that's already done. But in the future, they could put a little bit of generation at the Beck complex. What they're working on, they're not going to get any more energy out of the Beck complex because it's a treaty. I mean, how much energy? Basically, how much falling water is there? You translate that, and that's the amount of energy. So they're not going to get any more of that because that's governed by treaty. But they can get more capacity. Now, the project that they had to refit the turbines, they may get a little bit more energy because of the efficiency factor. It's just like a point here, a point there. They were going to have to rebuild the turbines anyways, so they might get a little bit more out of that. But mostly what they've been working on is capacity, which is when you turn the thing all the way on, what do you get out of it? And that's a big deal. So you recall some years ago, there was a tunneling project, a very high degree of difficulty tunneling project under the city of Niagara Falls. And that didn't increase the amount of energy that OPG gets out of the plant at all. But it's about capacity, which is when you really crank it up, how much do you get? And then the rest of the time, you just canter along and let your other renewables and nuclear and everything just carry the load.
Jim has another question. Jim?
You're muted, Jim. Unmute, Jim.
Who was the treaty with?
You're going to regret asking that question. It's a treaty between Canada and the United States that governs the allocation of the waters in the Great Lakes Basin equally between the two nations, because the border runs right down the center. So there's the natural flow of the Great Lakes system. So if you wanted to, where's the reservoir for Niagara Falls? It's the entire upper Great Lakes system. So you're not going to run out of water. So what it does is it allocates the water equally between the two parties. And then there's pluses and minuses. So on the American side, they lose credit because they actually water a channel between the Great Lakes Basin and the Mississippi Basin, which was, it's historically in indigenous times, that was those two systems communicated, but not that much, and it was just through wetland. So now there is a channel through there. I don't know that much about it, but anyways, they lose credit because they do take water from the Great Lakes system. They lose credit for that. They lose credit for the little amount of water that they put through at Buffalo for the Erie Canal, which is it's basically a recreational channel now. Canada gains credit because they diverted water. So the Albany River Basin, the barrier between the watershed between the Albany River Basin and the Great Lakes Basin is eerily close to the North Shore of Superior. It's freak of nature. And so the authorities of the day, and we're talking like mid-century, said, well, all this water just goes to waste. It just goes into the great, James Bay, Hudson's Bay system. It wasn't going to waste. The First Nations people were using it, but nobody was thinking about that at the time. And so there are two dams. It's called the Long Lac and Ogoki diversions. And what that does is it steals water from the Albany River Basin and diverts it into Lake Superior. And so that amount varies significantly. The authorities, between the two countries later said, okay, here's the number. And so it's that water that, best I can determine from my interviews, that's the justification. Like the Cute Falls Power Station kind of needs to keep running because that's its water. I might have got that wrong, but it's directionally that's where it is. So Ontario, Canada gains water there and gets to use it for power generation. Canada loses credit at the Trent Canal, but that's a very, very small amount. It loses credit, 150 million cubic meters a year of credit at the Welland Canal, most of which goes through power turbines. 97% goes through some power turbine or another. And so all this stuff is totted up. And then there's a treaty about how much goes over Niagara Falls. So that's an agreement between two countries, because although there's the American Falls, which are not that interesting, the Canadian Falls, which are absolutely magnificent, that is an agreement, and it's basically diurnal. So like every day it changes, and it's seasonal because the tourists, that's a big part of the economy on both sides of the border as well. So that's how that came about. There's actually no provision for controlling water. Might have noticed that the level of Lake Ontario has been up and down, kind of significantly over the last couple of decades, and it's done that always. That's very, very hard to control. You can't control the intake because the water that goes into the Niagara River from Lake Erie, and therefore the main Great Lakes system, is completely uncontrolled. Like you go there and you look across, there's nothing. No tunnels, no barriers, nothing. So that just hauls down the mighty Niagara River. It goes over the falls. Anything that goes out at the canal and to the power plants, it just ends up back in the lower Niagara River again. And so here, I mean, there are some properties, and I mean, normally don't have sympathy for the rich, but there are some houses, that the rich own that are right on the Niagara River. And my wife and I took a river cruise once, and they were flooded. The main houses up the hill, they were fine, but the boat houses and the recreational areas and all that sort of thing, they were flooded. I've been in, and you may have done the same thing. Remember sitting in an airplane. I think it might have been who was it now? It might have been a Porter flight. And I was on sitting in the plane looking out. We were on the east edge of the runway system for the Billy Bishop Airport, and there was no freeboard. The water was just lapping up onto the pavement. There's really not a whole lot you can do about that. The only thing you can do is to relieve water out the other end. But see, you've got other reliant interests. Obviously, you've got Montreal. On the American side, you've got Rochester and Oswego and some other smaller communities. But if you do that, it's not just Montreal. You're gonna flood Ottawa as well, because it's just the water will just back all the way up. So that's a situation worth watching. That's an answer to a question you didn't ask, but
Wow.
what the heck?
What was the story about Tesla? And did Edison ever try transmitting the DC current at that time?
I think by the time 1898 rolled around, so most of the big power plants.
Call from +14162538794.
By the time that the first generation power plants were built at Niagara Falls, like I say, they're all gone now. They're either museums or they're decommissioned or something, because the water rights are more valuable downstream. By the time that had happened, I think the kind of the smackdown between AC and DC had largely been resolved. Local systems, I think, could run on DC, and this part I haven't researched, but you just run across stuff. But if you want to go distance, so the distance between DeCue Falls Generating Station and Hamilton, that qualified at that time as long distance transmission. And that was the main interest that the historical Nikola Tesla had. And he was there, like he actually was looking at this thing, and like he knew how it all worked. And I'd like to find out more about that. I mean, I would love to have a picture of the historical Nikola Tesla at the plant during its construction, but so far, no such thing has been. But in terms of long range transmission, nobody would have thought about sending DC that distance at the voltages that they were talking at the time. Now, in the modern era, during my working life, I worked on projects where the transmission was HVDC. So they're talking, what was it now? I don't know, like 800 kilovolts. I'm just, I know I should have the exact number, No, 765 kilovolts. So if you go to the new power station at Churchill Falls in Labrador, Newfoundland, Labrador, and that's transmitted by HVDC all the way from there, all the way to the St. John's area, and it's long distance travel is all of 765 kV. So DC works, but it only works if you go to this otherworldly voltages and a bunch of other stuff, and using technology that was 100 years in the future at the time that the Q Falls #1 first went into service.
I am so pleased that you've been with us today, Tom.
My pleasure.
It's,
Jane,
that
how'd I do?
You're you're muted. It's okay if you want to
Yeah,
unmute
no,
yourself.
just absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Enjoyed it.
Good, good. I certainly enjoyed it, and it certainly provoked a lot of thought and ideas. And I hope you will come back to speak to one of your topics upcoming. Perhaps, I don't know how soon you'll be ready, but perhaps in the new year, but if not, next fall.
I would think it's more likely to be next fall. And the reason is that if you take all of my presentations, my first presentation basically summed up all the canals. And then the single biggest story other than that is the one that we went through today.
Mhm.
So I was thinking for this without just doing a presentation on the second Welland Canal. I said, I've already shared this, so I don't want to repeat. I think I'm going to need fresh heat, so I've got to do some more research and come back with something that is kind of interesting, even if you had seen every single thing, even if you had read my entire site, something that would be interesting, in that context. There's a couple of other kind of oddball stories. Just like first Welland Canal, they needed a source of high water because I know I told you about this, but they misestimated how far they had to dig, down on the watershed that's between Ellenberg and Port Robinson on the canal. It's way more than they thought. They totally blew that. They would never have done it if they had the right numbers. So they said, well, we just can't. We can't dig down that far because all we got is Irishmen. There's a lot of anti-Irish prejudice at the time, and our animals. That's all we got. There's no chance we're going to get down that far. They didn't get that. They didn't get down that far until the third canal. So they needed a source of high water to run the canal. So they went to the Grand River. Grand River. It's not even close. And they ran what's called a feeder canal from what is now Dunnville. And at that time,
That's a long way away.
There's nothing there. And they ran that across land. I think I might have showed you a picture of this last time, maybe not. Either way, like there's not much left, but there's not enough there to kind of make, to kind of keep us all interested for an hour. So I got to do more work.
I will be in touch with you in the spring. We'll see what we can do for next fall. In the meanwhile, thank you so much, Tom, for
It's a pleasure.
your vast knowledge of this area. I shall be sending you a little token of our appreciation.
Well, that's very kind. I appreciate that.
Let's give Tom a little Shellback round of applause, wave, or whatever. Thank you so much. And ironically,
My pleasure.
well, we're so happy to have had you here. And that brings up what's coming up next time. The next time we'll be on Zoom only again. And this time we will have a video, The Mystery of the Shetland Viking Ship Burial, with Tony Robinson and his time team. And the time team crew trekked to one of the outermost Shetland Islands, Feller, in an attempt to reveal the truth behind an ancient local myth. A clifftop mound has long been known as the Giant's Grave, but what does it conceal? So that will be next week. And the week after, we continue looking at water. We will be joined by Katrin Faradani, and she'll share her research dubbed Interconnected, a visual exploration of the Toronto water system,
Whoa.
its connection to our drinking water and Lake Ontario. She examines the consequences of urbanization and the solutions for mitigating its negative effects for better water management in the Greater Toronto area. So her pictures are fantastic. And when I contacted her, she was delighted to be joining us. A reminder that we will have breakout rooms for a short while afterwards. If you wish to join, that would be wonderful. And with that, pipes out. Thank you so much for being here.